Hey everybody, and welcome to video number 2 for chapter number 9. Alright, so we're talking about concepts and categories. This is the meat of the chapter, and this video is going to be a little bit longer than the others. This is definitely going to be the longest video of this chapter. So, if you got a chance, if you got 20-25 minutes, I'm hoping, sit back, relax, get yourself a coffee, and let's get into it. Alright, so when we talk about concepts and categories, this is surprisingly more controversial and harder than you might expect. Just a little bit of background, not to try to make this about me, but my thesis was about concept formation, and specifically we're looking at concept formation in non-human animals. And I found very quickly in that lab that this is something that people are very passionate about, very skeptical about, and have a hard time wrestling with definitions for it. So, with that being said, I'm going to try to be as broad as possible so that way we can kind of cover not only what our textbook covers, but also to talk about what the things that basically people will agree on. Because if we want to get more nitty-gritty, we absolutely can, but then we start moving into areas that both philosophers, cognitive neuroscientists, and cognitive psychologists have some disagreement with. And if you want to talk about that stuff, I could talk to you about that stuff for hours. But not even my wife wants to hear about that. So let's get into it. So when we talk about what concepts and categories are, I want to make a quick distinction about the two. That when we talk about concepts, generally that there are two different kinds of concepts. Natural concepts are going to be what we think of normally as categories. Abstract concepts, on the other hand, are going to be different. Abstract concepts are not categories. So sometimes if you hear me use the phrase categories, what I'm talking about is natural concepts. If you hear me specifically use the word abstract concepts, that is very different from what a category is. So, in the book, you'll see the phrase family semblance. We're going to end this video by talking and revisiting what family semblance means. But essentially what family semblance is looking for characteristics that a group of things have in common. So, family semblance could be, for a chair, for example, the family semblance for chairs is something you can sit on. They have 4 legs, and that they have a back to them that you can lean in. That basically those are the physical characteristics that all of them have in common. And so that is what makes the category of a chair. It has 4 legs, has a seat, and has a back. That's very different from abstract concepts. Abstract concepts, on the other hand, are all about relationships. So they are relational. Sometimes you'll hear these called relational concepts or relational categories. And essentially what that means is that it requires at least 2 members, 2 objects in which you are comparing, and the important thing about them is the relationship that they have with one another, not necessarily what they share in common. So what I mean by that is the concept of heaviness is an abstract concept. Heaviness does not exist on its own. Heaviness requires a comparison between 2 or more items. The same is true for brightness. The same is true for sameness. These are all things that require other members or other objects, other participants in order for us to make those comparisons, because they are defined by their relationships with one another. But for the most part, what we're going to be talking about in this chapter is going to be this first piece, natural concepts and categories. All right, so already we're getting pretty abstract. So to make things a little bit more abstract, I want to talk about this guy right here. I know this looks like a mugshot, but this guy is one of the most influential philosophers of the 1900s. His name is Ludwig Wittgenstein, and essentially he was kind of a one-hit wonder in a way. During his life, he published one massive article that was very, very influential, and to my knowledge, I think he may have had another book published posthumously after he passed away because he died very young. But for the most part, kind of known for this one big kind of treatise about memory, concepts, and language. It was pretty comprehensive, even if it was just one article. So this is a one-hit wonder. So show your respect. So basically, he had kind of a philosophical game, and this game posed a very difficult question for what concepts are. So he and of course, because he's a philosopher, he had to make it meta. So the game that he wanted to play is about what a game is. So what is a game? And this is a point where in the classroom, usually if I ask this, I will pause and I will let people give me a list of things that constitute what a game is, and I'll write them up on the board. And usually what I will get is something very similar to this, that what a game is something that is played by children, something that is engaged in for fun, something that has rules, something that involves multiple people, something that is competitive, and something that is played during leisure. So, now chances are you may not agree with all these. That's okay, we're going to talk about that. But what I want you to do is, if you thought about what a game is, I want you to introspect and reflect on that process. What was it that came to mind? Do you remember maybe what you thought about whenever you tried to come up with a definition? We're going to come back to that. That's an important question that we're gonna probe a little bit more after this. So these definitions, if you look at these definitions and you look at that and you're like, yeah, but I don't know, Ludwig, those seem a little bit, something about them just doesn't feel right. If that's what you're thinking, that's perfectly fine, because he points out that all of these have exceptions. So, for example, sorry, my phone's all buzzing. Basically, he's pointing out these exceptions, that if it's played by children, well, gambling and the lottery, for example, are games, but they're not played by children. That professional sports are games, but they are not engaged in for fun. If you were to ask your favorite football player or basketball player, hey, did you have a blast out there on the court or on the field? They're going to say, no, I was doing my job, I was working, right? A game has rules, but some games don't, right? Like playing with blocks, playing with Legos, those do not have rules. You just kind of have fun with them, right? They don't have to involve multiple people. Solitaire is a game. Candy Crush is a game. Clash of Clans or League of Legends. Well, I guess League of Legends does have, both of those games have other people in them. So don't think about that. But any kind of single player game like Solitaire, like Sudoku, like crossword puzzles, those are games, but they don't require multiple people. They don't have to be competitive. So, for example, playing with a tea party, that is a game, or playing house, playing doctor or whatever. Those are games, but they don't have any kind of competition to them. Neither does really like playing with Legos. And they don't have to be played during leisure either, because other things like professional sports that we talked about are things that are serious, that maybe are a game, but that you do not because you necessarily have fun, but because you're training your skills in. So there's lots of different ways in which those definitions will have very clear exceptions to them. And that poses a big problem. If we're trying to define what a concept is, well, now we're just showing that nothing can be a concept, because every concept has its own exceptions. And that is okay, because now cognitive psychology is going to come to the rescue. Sorry, Ludwig, but we're gonna dive into the brain now. So let's talk about what constitutes a mammal. So if you think about what a mammal is, if you can, pause this video and just brainstorm a couple of things that a mammal is. So characteristics of a mammal. All right, that was an awkward enough pause that you probably were able to generate a couple of items. So whenever we do that, there's a lot of different things that you could have applied. You could have said that they're warm-blooded, that they have fur, that they walk on all fours, that they have teeth, that they eat food, that they have live birth, and things like that. And in those cases, a lot of those are perfectly fine. But again, we can still find lots of exceptions. Mammals don't have to have fur. We know that hairless cats don't have fur, right? They don't have to have live birth, right? Platypuses, they lay eggs, and so do spiny echidnas. They both lay. Those are mammals, and they both lay eggs. So we can find exceptions in all these things for our notion of what a mammal is. So the way in which we come to that conclusion about what a mammal is, or what a game is, there's two different routes that we can get there. One is the prototype view, and the other is the exemplar view. The prototype view, and we're going to go into each of these in a little bit more detail. The prototype view is going to be that we think of one big, important, central example of the category, and then we start making comparisons based on that particular member, that central idea. The exemplar view, on the other hand, is essentially that you're going to be thinking about lots of different examples and what they have in common. And so in that way, honestly, I don't think the book really talks about it like this, but you can think about the exemplar view then as being a little bit more about family semblance, because what you're doing is you're looking for things that they have in common, or you're looking at a bunch of things and what they have in common, instead of looking at one thing and trying to apply it to a greater idea. So let's talk about each of these. So if I were to get you to tell me more about what you consider to be a mammal, chances are you're not going to be thinking about things that fly, nor are you going to be thinking about things that lay eggs. Both of these are very strange, atypical examples of mammals, right? This bat uses echolocation. They emit sounds that help them navigate. This platypus, well, it's strange in a lot of ways, right? It has a poisonous spur behind its flippers. Most mammals do not have poison, or do not have poisonous spurs on them. It lays eggs. It secretes milk through its skin instead of a mammary gland. It has a beak like a bird. So in a lot of ways, that does not represent a normal mammal, but it is. It's a type of mammal. It's a monotreme, but you get the idea that there are always going to be these exceptions, and that's okay. So if you are thinking about if I ask you what a mammal is and you think about a specific one, I just showed you an example of a lion. For me, that's kind of like the prototypical mammal. If you were to ask me what a mammal is, I immediately imagine a lion, and I start telling you features about that lion. Because to me, that represents a lot of what I think about mammals. That they are big, they live on land, that they are social, that they have fur, that they walk on all fours, that they're warm-blooded, that they live outside, etc. They have two eyes, and so on. So whenever I'm doing that, what I'm doing is engaging in this prototype view of concepts. That essentially I am thinking about a specific centralized idea, this member of this category, and I'm thinking about what kind of characteristics does it have. And then I'm saying that category is going to be roughly defined by those characteristics that this one centralized member has. So if I were to, and as I mentioned here, that there are exceptions to these things. So just because we learn, for example, or actually let me take that back. If I were to show you a picture of a bat and you'd never seen a bat in your life, your first response would be like, oh, what the hell is that? What planet did that come from? The second response is going to be, what type of animal is that? And that's really hard, right? Because if you're trying to compare that to a lion, it has very, very few characteristics in common, right? And so in that regard, the prototype view makes it, in some cases, hard to remember what animals belong, or what things belong to a category, specifically the ones that are more unusual or more atypical. They have fewer of these things in common with our prototype, and so they are harder to classify. Another example would be like a penguin, for example. A penguin is a bird, but doesn't really have a whole lot in common with a pigeon, for example. Whenever I think about a standard, normal, default bird, I think of a pigeon. And so doesn't have all that much in common with. They can't fly, they live in the ice, that they go swimming a lot and things like that, which is none of the things that pigeons really do. Alright, so the further away an example is from our prototype, the harder it is for us to distinguish or distinguish as part of that category, or even to trust or to assume that it is part of that category too. There's a couple of ways that we can measure this. One fun way is the sentence verification task, and this does have a link. If you did buy the new textbook, there is your book comes with a code, if you bought the new one, that will take you to a website where you can do these cognitive tests. This is one of the tests that you can do. It's very fun. It's not very fun. It's kind of engaging and kind of interesting. And essentially what you're doing is you're responding as quickly as possible, true or false. So in this case, true or false. Pigeons are birds. Boom, you know that's true. Blue jays are birds. Boom, you know that's true. Alligators are birds. Boom, you know that's false. Robins are birds. Yes, those are true. Penguins are birds. Yes, that's true. Pumpkins are birds. No, that's false. And what happens is that when our people do this task, generally they will find, and this last one, ostriches are birds. If we were doing this, we would find that of the ones that are true, so we're going to cross out alligators are birds, that one's not true, pumpkins are not birds either, which leaves us with just these others, these 5. What we'd find is that penguins and ostriches are going to have the longest reaction time. It takes people longer to respond to them than to the others. So, why is that? It's basically because these have less in common with these other birds that probably steer closer to our prototype of what a bird is. So in the sentence verification task, almost always the accuracy is going to be very, very high on these things, but the main dependent variable of interest is going to be the reaction time, because that is going to vary widely across the different kinds of statements that are made. The closer something comes to the prototype of your concept, the faster the reaction time is. The farther away it is, the slower our reaction time is. So, for example, whenever you say bird, if the first thing that pops into your bird is a robin, robin is very different looking than an ostrich, and very different looking than a penguin, and even pretty different looking than a peacock. And so what we would expect is that you're going to have really long reaction times on the ostriches and the penguins, kind of long reaction times on the peacock and the parrot and the pheasant, but very fast reaction times on the robin, on the dove, on the canary, and on the sparrow, because those are all closer to the prototype of that category. And there's the link there if you want to check out that test. So the second view of category formation, and again, whenever I asked you about what a game was or what a mammal was, I hope that you thought about what went through your mind as you were making that judgment. Because it could have been the prototype view, it could also be the exemplar view. The exemplar view is essentially that instead of thinking about a specific centralized stimulus, what you're doing is thinking about lots of examples and what those examples have in common with one another. And so, if we want to think about it that way, that the prototype view is very top-down. Essentially, you're thinking about something and then you are trying to extrapolate from that one thing. The exemplar theory, the exemplar view of concept formation, is going to be very bottom-up. In other words, we're looking at what they all have in common and then coming to a conclusion based on that consensus about what they all have in common. So the features that you hold in common across these different things are what's going to define that category. So, for example, if I asked you, what features does a mammal have? And you thought about maybe 5 or 6 different mammals, and you thought about what they all have in common, that would be an example of the exemplar view. You're using the exemplar view in order to make that judgment. And so, if you are, and one thing that that I want you to think about is like, okay, well, what if you are seeing something you've never seen before? So you're seeing something like a bat, for example, and you want to know what it is. Maybe you are going to compare it to a lion, and you're going to find those are very, very different things. So the prototype view is going to probably going to tell us that that bat is not a mammal, right? It does not look like a lion, doesn't act like a lion, doesn't eat like a lion, doesn't live like a lion. If you think about then maybe the exemplar view, where you think about maybe 5 or 6 animals and you think about what they have in common, and then you look at the bat and you think like, oh, well, the bat, it, you know, has 4 appendages, it is warm-blooded, it has fur on it, and it gives live birth. Well, that's not true for birds, not true for reptiles, so it must be, I guess it must be some kind of mammal, right? In that case, you'd have much more success in the exemplar view. That's not always true. You know, it depends on the specific case that you're looking at, but you get the idea. So, for example, if you were looking, if you're creating a category from scratch, let's say you've never seen a computer before and you see a computer for the first time in your life, essentially that category is going to be that computer that you see. So let's say that you see a laptop. That's the first one that you see. You're going to assume then that all laptops are going to be like that all laptops have a built-in screen, they have a touchpad, they have a built-in keyboard, that they can be unplugged, they run on batteries, that they have a webcam, and things like that. But that's not true for all of them, right? And so let's say that the next 10 computers that you came across were all laptops in the same kind of way. Then the next time, the first time you ever see, I don't know, a smartphone, which is a computer, or you see a desktop computer, you might have a harder time assuming or categorizing those things as computers because they're very different from the common features of a laptop. All right, so and this kind of table just gives you a quick kind of explanation about the differences between prototype and exemplar views. All right, so if I were to ask you about this animal right here, you may have never seen this animal. If you haven't, what is this animal? What kind of animal is it? Chances are, as you look at this, you're going to say that it's a mammal, right? And that's fine. But again, I want you to think about how did you come to that conclusion? If you look at this and you think, well, it looks a little bit like a sloth, it looks like one of those common sloths that you see climbing trees, so therefore it must be a mammal, in that case, you're using the prototype view because you're comparing this to one centralized stimulus, in this case, a sloth. But if you're looking at it and you're thinking, well, it's got forward-facing eyes, it's got tiny little ears and a little mouth, and it's got hands, it's got fur, it must be a mammal in that case. Then you're using the exemplar view. So that just gives you an idea about the differences between these two views. So you can probably bet that like on the exam, I will ask you to tell me about what it would be like to come across something you've never seen before and having to categorize it and what that experience might be like if you were to use the prototype view or if you were to use the exemplar view. All right, so the way that I want to wind this video down is by talking about concepts in non-human animals. Again, this is something that I could literally talk to you about for a whole day, but instead I want to show you one specific study, one landmark study in this field. This is from the 1990s. This is by Watanabe and colleagues. Watanabe, a researcher from Japan, did a really cool experiment with pigeons and with art. Specifically, he was looking at images of Picasso and images of Monet. The rule here for the pigeon was to peck at the screen whenever you saw a work from Picasso. And that's what you have to do. And if you peck and it is a picture that Picasso made, then you get food. And if it's of Monet and you peck, then you don't get food and you have to wait. And then the next one comes up. All right. So, again, whenever I've done this, I try to make it interactive in the classroom, and so I have people like pounding on their tables whenever they see a Picasso. Instead, what I want you to do is I want you to try to make a mental note whenever you feel like you see a Picasso versus when you see a Monet. All right, so here we go. I'm not going to give you the answers until later. I just want you to think about whether or not these are or are not Picasso. All right, So in that task, pigeons are really good at that. I don't know how well you did, but generally people are pretty good at this too. But here's the thing, is that a pigeon has no idea who Picasso is, right? And yet they're still really good at doing this task. The reason why they are is because it's very easy for them to pick up on the family semblance. They don't know, oh yeah, Picasso, the Spanish painter from the 1900s. They're not who was inspired by Cubism and the Spanish Revolution. Pigeons don't think about that, right? They're not trained in art history or anything like that. Instead, they're just looking at the physical characteristics of that painting and whether or not those physical characteristics are similar to other paintings that they have learned are in that category. So essentially what they're learning is, what do these things have in common? So for Picasso, all you need to know, you don't need to know anything about Pablo Picasso. All you need to know is that, well, his paintings have bold colors and harsh colors and big, bold lines. So if we go back and look, for example, we see very vivid colors, high contrast, and lots of dark lines and dark contours, right, that are very big. And so we see that throughout. And then that's very different than this, where we don't see those harsh contours. This is much softer looking, right? So basically you can train a pigeon to recognize Picasso and discriminate Picasso, or you can train them to pick up on Monet and respond to Monet. But the fascinating thing here is that was just experiment number 1. Experiment number 2 then was to show them images from other painters that have similar styles. So then show them paintings from other cubists who are of that art style or of that movement versus impressionists, who Claude Monet was a member of that movement. And they do learn that. They do learn that, okay, well, this is not a Monet or Picasso, but it looks like maybe it's more of a Monet, right? Softer colors, there's not super heavy lines in it. This one may be more of a Picasso, this one may be more of a Picasso, this one may be more of a Monet, maybe more of a Monet, maybe more of a Picasso, and etc. That these pigeons are able to learn these even though they're not the same authors, they're not the same artists, they're just the same kind of style, and they can easily pick up on that because what they've learned is the ways in which those categories are formed by their physical characteristics, what they have in common. All right, so the reason why we were able to do this is because concepts are very much like schemas, and we're going to pick up on that in the next video. See you there.